Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's dive into the top headlines of the hour. Iran warns President Donald Trump that any US attack will trigger strikes on Israel and American military bases in the region. The warning comes as Trump signals support for Iranian protesters and Israel remains on high alert. Meanwhile, Iranian authorities step up their crackdown on mass anti-government protests, with the Revolutionary Guards blaming terrorists for the unrest. Reports say more than 115 people are dead, hospitals are overwhelmed, and internet access has been cut for over 60 hours. In Minneapolis, tens of thousands turn out to protest and police arrest at least 29 people over the fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent. One officer is injured after being hit by an object as demonstrators clash with police over US immigration enforcement. A Ukrainian drone attack kills a woman and damages homes and buildings in Russia's southern city of Voronovsk, local officials have said. Kiev says the strikes target Russian military sites in response to Moscow's continued attacks on Ukraine. The US and partner forces carry out large-scale airstrikes on Islamic State targets in Syria after a deadly attack on American troops last month. The Pentagon says the operation aims to crush IS threats and protect US and allied forces in the region. Voters in Myanmar take part in the second phase of a military-run election that critics say is designed to formalize junta rule. The country remains gripped by civil war since the 2021 coup that ousted the elected government. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaks by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, confirms a US official. Reports say the talks focus on Gaza, Syria, and Iran's growing anti-government protests. In the entertainment world, the 83rd Golden Globe Awards begin tonight in Beverly Hills with nominees including Timothée Chalamet, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Emma Stone. Comedian Nikki Glaser returns as host for a second year after making history with her solo debut in 2025. Now we start this hour with our continuing coverage of the events in Iran, and authorities there say they have carried out what they call significant arrests linked to the wave of protests rocking the country. The National Police Chief, Ahmed Reza Radan, says that key figures behind the unrest were detained overnight and will face punishment after legal procedures. He did not give numbers or names of those arrested. The crackdown comes as tensions escalate beyond Iran's borders. Iran has warned the United States that any attack on Tehran would trigger retaliation against Israel and US military bases across the region. Israel is now on high alert amid fears of possible US military intervention in support of the protests. Reports say Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio discussed the situation by phone. Inside Iran, Parliament is holding emergency discussions on the unrest, with lawmakers chanting anti-US slogans as the crisis deepens. Joining us now is Peter Baum. He's the editor of the Weekly Blitz and he joins us live from London. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Could I just get your initial reaction to the statement that's been put out by the Iranian government that Iran will indeed retaliate if the United States does get involved? It said it will strike both Israel and United States military bases in the region. Do you think that this will prevent the United States from intervening?
Good day, Thomas. Thanks for having me on your show. No, I don't think it will prevent the United States from intervening. And the strong rhetoric coming out from the Iranian government is to be expected. The only thing that is a little bit strange is that it's taken so long for the Iranian government to react. And during that time, they've strategically missed opportunities as they have done previously, to crack down on the protest significantly quicker. From what we understand, because like yourself, Thomas, internet access has been cut off to us, and the only feedback I'm getting is from third party sources who have access to colleagues in Iran with the Starlink, Elon Musk Starlink communication satellite. So, but going back to your question, from what I understand now, Israel and the United States military are in discussions as to what their imminent actions will be, if any. And the statements made from the Iranian government are to be fully expected. One would expect no less that kind of strong rhetoric to keep the government in line.
Indeed, and of course, we've seen protests now entering the second week. Now, over 100 people have been reported killed, although it's hard to verify these things due to the fact that internet has now been out in Iran for over 60 hours now. Do you think we're seeing something different here? We've seen mass protests, of course, over the years, 2022 being the most recent one. However, the world seems to be really keeping their eyes on Iran and projecting a clear thing that they want to happen. But do you think this wave of protests has the potential to become something significant?
Yes, indeed. Previous protests have always, within Iran, have always been stopped by the strong hand of the IRGC. They've lasted for no more than at most 5 or 6 days before they've died down. Now, this particular, I think it's too easy to call it a protest, Thomas. This is, to me, seems like the domestic Iranian population is seeking nothing more than regime change through a popular uprising. The fact that many of this was reported when we did have internet, that many of the police and military, not the IRGC at that stage, had defected. The fact that we know that several Iranian cabinet members are seeking to leave Iran gives an indication of how different these particular protests are. And the fact that they've lasted for, I think this is the 14th day now, Thomas, I'm saying correctly.
Yes.
I think 14th day is an indication that compared to previous protests, this is something different. The other thing is, Thomas, we've seen for the first time the burning of mosques, the pulling down of statues of imams and IRGC heroes, let's call them that. This has the potential of clearly changing the regime in Iran, and also the fact that Reza Pahlavi is doing his public relations bit to ensure that the protests, the revolution is still ongoing. So, and for the first time, Thomas, we've also seen, as we saw in London yesterday, an Iranian embassy being taken over and protests, pro-Iranian protests being on the streets of the Western capital. It happened in France, and I gather in Australia as well. So again, to answer your question, now it's not to say that the protesters are going to be successful, and we're probably at a tipping point as we speak now. If the US and Israelis decide to act militarily, I think that will be the defining moment, which will actually bring down the totalitarian theocracy in Iran.
Yes, Peter, do stay with us as we move on to another development, but we stay on the same topic, of course. And Iran is issuing a sharp warning to Washington as protests continue across the country. The Speaker of Iran's parliament says any new US military attack would trigger retaliation against American forces and shipping in the region. Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf told lawmakers that US military centres and maritime targets would be considered legitimate targets. He also appeared to reference Israel, which Iran does not recognise. The remarks come as tensions rise amid nationwide unrest inside Iran and growing concern over possible foreign intervention. Peter joins us once again. Peter, of course, we've seen thousands and thousands of people take to the streets across all 31 provinces in Iran. And now we see, of course, deaths occur, but also both Donald Trump saying that he might possibly get involved. Now, of course, since the Iranian nuclear strikes, we've seen that he's not afraid of taking action when it comes to stepping foot on, well, not stepping foot, but striking Iranian soil. But some critics are saying that this would cause more problems than solutions, especially due to the mass turnout of the Iranian people and the problems that these protests are causing for the Iranian regime by themselves. Do you believe American intervention here would be a positive thing, especially for the likes of Israel, who has been pitched by the Iranian regime and has been said that it will be struck if the United States get involved?
Yeah, from an Israeli perspective, regime change would be the ultimate goal. Let's not beat around the bush on that one. That's what the Israelis desire most of all, because Iran, via their proxies, have been a huge military threat to the existence of Israel. And I'm sure that Netanyahu, during his discussions with Donald Trump, will be doing everything in his power to create the conditions for the Americans to strike militarily at the regime. However, this in itself would bring problems, because the protests in the streets are gathering momentum, and Trump will be analysing whether it would be necessary to to bomb Iran as Americans did during the war with Israel. He will be analysing this, and his advisors will be saying, well, maybe let's hold on, because a strike on Iran could bring its own problems. It could be unpopular within the United States. Iran is very weak at the moment. Venezuela can no longer be relied upon to provide financial aid or any oil. The Iranian proxies have all been weakened because of the war with Israel. So it's got to be a very careful analysis. Let's not forget that as we speak, Americans are bombing ISIS in Syria. So to get involved militarily in Iran would not be something that they have to contemplate too carefully, other than could it negate what the Iranian population themselves are doing, or would it ensure the utter destruction of the Iranian regime? It's a very careful balancing act. My gut feeling is, if the Iranian government continues to crack down with the force it has been cracking down on the protesters in the last 48 hours, I would suggest to you that Trump will have no other option, because he said he would go in militarily on the Iranian government, and that would be the end of that government.
But how is this going to fease with Trump's base at home? Of course, Donald Trump, a long-term critic of the Iraq war in 2003, the invasion of Iraq. He's campaigned on not dragging America into foreign wars, and now the start of 2026, in the first 14 days, if he was to act on both Venezuela and this, how does that put him instead for the midterms at the end of the year?
Isn't that the paradox, though, Thomas? You're quite right. He's gone into Venezuela. He's even bombing Syria as we now speak. And yet the base in America seems to have taken it all in and has not been overly critical of what he's actually doing. Going into Iran may be the tipping point for that base in America, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons why Trump may decide, after careful analysis, not to go into Iran militarily. But having stated to the Iranian people he will go in hard, or whatever terminology he used, I can't remember the exact phrase, he's in a difficult position. I think his base would actually allow him to get away with it. It seems to me that what's going on domestically in Minneapolis is more of a concern to him at the moment than the Maduro issue, the ISIS issue in Syria, and potentially the going into Iran militarily. But again, it's something that I'm sure he will be weighing up, because as you quite rightly stated, it's the midterms coming up, and he has to be very aware of that. An Iranian military intervention may not be particularly appetizing for the MAGA base.
Could this be something that he puts to Congress? Of course, Donald Trump has been criticised for the foreign policy actions, mainly, of course, the bombing of Iranian nuclear sites and the operation in Venezuela, both of which have been secret operations. This one, however, not so much. Could that be a possible avenue that he takes?
It may well be, and that may be his way out and way in. It would be very interesting. You see, I think under the American Constitution, he would have to go to Congress. However, he didn't when he bombed Iran in the 12-day war. So he may use that as a precedent. But all this must be weighing very carefully on his mind. And I think the actions of the Iranian government will be the deciding factor on whether Trump goes in militarily. If, as I say, the regime cracks down harder, as they have been doing in the last 48 hours, I think he has no option. If, however, it's seen that the protesters are gaining momentum and getting the upper hand, I think he can then stay his hand.
Peter Baum, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World, and thank you for taking the time. We now move on, and experts have warned that the US President Donald Trump has ordered Special Forces commanders to draw up a plan for the invasion of Greenland. According to the report, Trump has directed the Joint Special Operations Command to develop an invasion plan, but the Joint Chiefs of Staff are opposed to the move, arguing it would be unlawful and lack congressional backing. Previously speaking at a White House event, Trump said that he is going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if they won't, Russia or China will take over. That's the US president's words there. Trump's comments have drawn condemnation, with European countries in particular warning that the move could mean the end of NATO. Joining us now to discuss this is Collins Chong-Yu-Keat. He's a foreign affairs, security and strategy analyst. He joins us live from the University of Malaya, and he joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much for joining us. This is, of course, is a story that has been in the headlines since the start of President Trump's second term. It went away for a bit, though, and now it is back at the top. There have been statements coming out of mainly the European partners and NATO partners as well, saying that this could be the end of the NATO alliance. This could be the end of the transatlantic alliance with Europe if Donald Trump were indeed to invade Greenland and take it along with its 60,000 residents. Collins, what are your thoughts in what Donald Trump's options are right now, whether it comes to a military invasion or a more diplomatic route forward?
Well, it is inevitable. We have seen how Greenland is strategically important for the US and also, of course, for the security of Europe as a whole. And Trump believes that the US decline came from allowing others to control strategic geography. We have seen that with the case of China in South China Sea. We have seen that in the case of Russia in Eastern Europe, Iran in the Gulf, and now potentially China and Russia in the Arctic. So Trump is right when he argued that if nothing is done on Greenland, China and Russia will definitely take over Greenland, and this will spell the end of the safety and security of Europe as a whole. And it is paradoxical and it is an irony for Europe to state that any potential aggressions by Washington on Greenland will definitely mark the end of NATO. NATO is heavily dependent on Washington. Europe is heavily dependent on Washington to safeguard its own security. So of course we have seen how Trump has used this strategic ambiguity, threat, and escalation to force negotiations from a position of fear. And so this invasion plan is not about wanting war; it's about forcing Denmark and Europe as a whole into a corner, so that they will have Trump will have bigger leverage. And of course, also it's going to happen some way or the other. And this is going to, of course, also increase the negotiating leverage on the part of Washington. And of course, it's a three-pronged message to Europe and NATO. There's no argument as to the strategic importance of the American security umbrella. And this security guarantee is not unconditional. And Trump is reminding Europe that NATO is not charity. It is the US who is protecting Europe, and Europe must accept the core concerns and wariness of the US as a whole. And this includes the importance of Greenland and the Arctic. And of course, the message to adversaries, to Moscow and Beijing, is that the Arctic and Greenland are definitely not are out of your contention to militarize or to increase your power presence in the Western Hemisphere. And this will definitely give a strategic dilemma to Europe. Risk Greenland or to risk the security umbrella with the US, or to, of course, also and eventually to risk the transatlantic relations. I think it's the easy way out. Europe will have to accept the inevitable reality that Europe's security is dependent on the strength of the US security as a whole. And Trump is definitely right when he said that Europe must not be hypocritical, and Europe must accept that Greenland is extremely important for the security of the US as a whole. And with that, when the security of the US is determined, is ensured, then of course Europe will get the positive ripple effects out of that reality. So it is going to happen some way or the other, and Europe must accept that it has to negotiate now, and it's foolish of Europe to choose the hard way or the difficult way, as Trump has pointed out.
And of course, Collins, the United States does have military power, a base on Greenland, but of course the NATO has kept Western alliances safe for over 70 years, and never have we seen before a NATO ally issue such provocative statements towards another. What do you think Donald Trump is trying to signal by not ruling out military action to take Greenland? Why can't he rule that out?
Of course, it is. It has been like for years now. It's an open secret that Trump has saved NATO from the notion of from the abyss of irrelevance. And now we have seen how the threat from Trump and has enabled the other NATO partners to increase their defense spending. And without the US security backing, NATO is going to be obsolete. And we have seen how the importance of Greenland, because Europe has been, the US has been complacent, and of course Europe has been taking this advantage under the Biden and Obama administrations, and this buck stops with Trump now. And we have seen how the criticality and the urgency of the situation now. China has openly labeled the Arctic as the backyard of China now, so has labeled itself as the near Arctic state. Russia has been there for years, for decades now. And all this have happened under the eyes of, under the administration of Obama and Biden. So, and this is extremely important to protect the Western Hemisphere. We have seen that in the case of Venezuela now. And this is extremely important also for the security of Europe as a whole. And if nothing is done, as Trump has rightly pointed out, China and Russia will take over Greenland, and this will spell the end of NATO also, regardless of what positions Trump has been taking. So, as I've stated, it is of strategic importance for Europe now to not to openly oppose the plans, or not to be seen as hostile, and this will only invite greater hostilities, or inevitably the military move by Trump. So it is of great importance now for Europe, of course, also to protect from its eastern flank from the threat of Russia, and all the more that it needs the security umbrella from the US. And it is wise for Europe to allow Trump to eventually protect the security of Europe through Greenland, and of course also to protect the space from the threat of Russia and China.
Collins Chong-Yu-Keat, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to speak to you and get your insight. We now move on and over to North Africa, and Egypt is making a major push towards clean energy. The government has signed renewable energy deals worth $1.8 billion. Several of the agreements involve Norway-based renewable energy developer Scatec, as Egypt looks to expand its solar and wind capacity and cut reliance on fossil fuels. The move comes just weeks after Israel approved a multi-billion-dollar natural gas deal with Egypt, highlighting Cairo's dual strategy of boosting energy security while investing in greener power. Officials say these new projects will support jobs, reduce emissions and strengthen Egypt's role as a regional energy hub. The Indian Space Research Organisation's first launch of 2026 is set for January the 12th, with the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle C-62 mission scheduled to lift off from Sriharikota at 4:47 GMT. However, the rocket will place the Advanced Earth Observation Satellite EOS-N1, also known as Anveshna, into orbit to boost India's surveillance and imaging capabilities. It is developed primarily for national security use, and the hyperspectral satellite can detect hundreds of wavelengths and will also support agriculture, urban mapping and environmental monitoring. Alongside EOS-N1, multiple Indian and international satellites will be deployed. Pre-launch checks have been completed, making it as the 64th flight of the ISRO. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.